Part 1, The Golden One. Begin not with a city, but with a lake. High in the eastern Cordillera of present-day Colombia, north of Bogotá, Lake Guatavita sits inside a round green bowl of hills. Mist gathers over the water in the morning. The slopes are quiet now, but for centuries, European imagination returned to this place with a hunger that was anything but quiet. The name that drew them was El Dorado. To many later readers, El Dorado means a lost city of gold. It suggests streets of metal, temples glittering in the jungle, and a treasure somewhere beyond the next ridge. But the older meaning is different. In Spanish, El Dorado can mean the gilded one or the golden one. It was first attached not to a city but to a person, a ruler, and to a ritual remembered through colonial accounts of the Muisca highlands. That difference matters, because the story of El Dorado is not simply the story of a false rumor. It is the story of a translation. A sacred practice became a treasure hunt. A ruler covered in gold dust became a kingdom of gold. Offerings made into water became wealth imagined as waiting underground. A ritual landscape was slowly rewritten as a map for conquest. The Muisca were not a vanished people from a fantasy tale. They were, and their descendants remain connected to, a real society of the northern Andes, highland chiefdoms with agriculture, trade, political hierarchy, ritual specialists, and remarkable metalwork. Their world included salt, textiles, emeralds, gold objects, mountain lakes, caves, and sacred places. Gold mattered, but not in the same way that it mattered to the Spaniards who arrived in the 16th century. For the Muisca, gold and tumbaga, an alloy often containing gold and copper, could become an offering. It could carry meaning between people, ancestors, deities, and places in the landscape. Small votive figures, known as tunjos, were placed in lakes, caves, and shrines. Some represented humans, others animals, serpents, or hybrid forms. Their value was not only the weight of metal, it was the act of giving, the ritual relationship, the movement of an object into a sacred place. The Spanish conquest brought a different grammar. Gold was treasure, revenue, ransom, proof of empire, and a reason to keep moving. When Europeans heard about gold given to lakes, they did not always hear a story of offering. They heard a story of recoverable wealth. One of the most influential accounts comes from Juan Rodríguez Freyle in a 17th century work often known as El Carnero. Freyle wrote long after the first conquest of the region, and his text is a colonial retelling, not a direct recording of a pre-contact ceremony. Still, it preserves the famous image that shaped the legend: a new ruler at a lake covered with gold dust, going out on a raft with attendants, casting precious objects into the water. Whether every detail of that account reflects actual ceremony cannot be assumed. The date, the author, the colonial setting, and the appetite for marvel all matter, but the account did not arise from nothing. Archaeology and surviving objects show that the Muisca did make offerings, that lakes were important, that goldworking was highly developed, and that ritual life was tied to specific places in the landscape. The most haunting object connected with the legend is the Muisca Raft, or Balsa Muisca, preserved in the Museo del Oro in Bogotá. It was not found in Lake Guatavita. It was discovered in 1969 at Pasca, south of the lake. The object is small enough to sit in a museum case, but its imaginative scale is enormous. A central figure stands on a raft, surrounded by attendants. The gold alloy surface glows. It seems to condense the entire legend into a single scene: ruler, raft, offerings, water, witnesses. But even this object must be treated carefully. It is not a photograph of the ceremony. It is not proof of a city. It is a ritual object, a work of art, and a survival from a world that was violently disrupted. It tells us that the story of a golden ruler has roots in Muisca material culture. It does not tell us that European treasure fantasies were true. That distinction is the heart of El Dorado. El Dorado, the Golden Man and the City That Wasn't There, Part 2. A sacred lake becomes a mine lake. Guatavita did not become famous in Europe because people wanted to understand Muisca religion. It became famous because they wanted to empty it. Spanish chroniclers and later writers described the lake as a treasury. The logic was simple and destructive. If gold had been thrown into the water, then gold could be taken out. The sacred lake became, in colonial eyes, a problem of engineering. Attempts to drain Lake Guatavita began early. Accounts summarized by museum histories describe efforts in the 16th century to lower the water. One attempt, around the 1540s, reportedly reduced the lake level by several meters and recovered objects. A later and much larger attempt, around 1580, used thousands of workers to cut into the crater rim. The water fell, more gold and emeralds were said to have been found, and the landscape was scarred. It is easy, from a distance, to turn these attempts into adventure, but they should be understood as extraction and damage. A place of offering was treated as a container to be opened. The people whose landscape it was had already endured conquest, forced labor, disease, and the dismantling of older political structures. The legend of El Dorado, in this sense, is not only romantic, it is also a record of what greed does to memory. Modern archaeology complicates the grandest versions of the story. Research in the Guatavita and Muisca Valley, including recent archaeological work, suggests that Guatavita was part of an important Muisca ritual landscape, with ceremonial centers and offering activity. But the evidence also cautions against simply accepting the spectacular mass ceremonies described by colonial texts. The material picture may point more towards small-scale ritual offerings than toward the enormous treasure scenes imagined by Europeans. That does not make the legend meaningless, it makes it more interesting. El Dorado is real as a history of transformation. There were real Muisca societies. There were real gold objects. There were real sacred places and offerings. There were colonial accounts of a gilded ruler. There were real attempts to drain a lake, and then, out of those pieces, Europe built something else, a moving dream of inexhaustible gold. Once El Dorado changed from a person into a place, it could move. If it was not at Lake Guatavita, perhaps it was deeper inland, if not in the highlands, perhaps beyond the rivers. If not in one valley, perhaps in a whole kingdom. The failure of one search did not end the legend, it only pushed it farther away. This is one reason El Dorado survived for so long. A city no one finds can always be placed somewhere else. The more it escapes discovery, the more it seems to promise that the next expedition may be the one. In the 16th and 17th centuries, such hopes helped drive journeys across northern South America. Men followed rivers, questioned indigenous communities, seized guides, and interpreted every rumor through the desire for gold. The original Muisca context blurred. A local story tied to a highland lake became a continental obsession. In European maps and books, El Dorado could become a king, a city, a province, or an empire. Sometimes it was confused with other tales. Sometimes it was placed in lands far from the Muisca world. The legend became portable because it served a colonial need. It justified motion, risk, violence, and hope. But when we return to the beginning, the scale changes. We are not looking at a golden metropolis. We are looking at objects small enough to hold. Tunjos, pendants, serpents, a raft, offerings made with skill and intention. We are looking at salt traders, metal workers, farmers, chiefs, ritual specialists, and communities whose lives were not organized around satisfying European fantasies. The Muisca were especially skilled in metallurgy. Gold could be hammered, cast, alloyed, and shaped through lost wax techniques. The forms were often delicate, human figures with flat bodies and patterned surfaces, animals, staff-like forms, scenes arranged in miniature. Many objects that survive today do so because they escaped melting. Countless others were destroyed, their original context reduced to bullion. That loss matters. When an object is melted, the metal remains, but the meaning is killed. A tunjo is not simply a lump of gold. It is a made thing, placed by someone for a reason, in a relationship with a place. Colonial extraction turned that relationship into weight. El Dorado, the Golden Man and the City That Wasn't There. Part 3. What was really lost? The familiar question asks, was El Dorado real? A better question is, which El Dorado? If by El Dorado we mean a hidden city of solid gold waiting somewhere in South America, then the evidence does not support it. That city belongs to the afterlife of the legend, to rumor, conquest writing, treasure maps, and modern adventure stories. If by El Dorado we mean the Golden One, a remembered ritual involving a ruler, offerings, and a sacred lake, then the answer is more careful. Early accounts are late and colonial. They are not neutral windows. But Muisca archaeology, gold objects, tunjos, and the Muisca Raft show that the legend was anchored in a real cultural world where gold, water, political authority, and sacred practice could meet. So El Dorado is neither simply true nor simply false. It is layered. At the base is a Muisca landscape. Above that is colonial witnessing and retelling. Above that is European desire. Above that is modern myth-making, the lost city, the jungle quest, the cinematic treasure. Each layer changes the one below it. The danger is not only that Europeans exaggerated, it is that the exaggeration became more famous than the people. A complex society was reduced to a clue. A ritual became a riddle. A lake became a vault. Gold objects became proof that more gold must be hidden somewhere else. To tell the story differently, we have to slow it down. We have to let the Muisca world appear first, before the treasure hunters arrive. We have to see the highland environment, cold lakes, bright slopes, trade routes, salt production, agriculture, and communities connected by obligation and ceremony. We have to see gold not as a universal language of greed, but as a material whose meaning depends on the society using it. When a Muisca object entered a lake, it may have been leaving ordinary circulation. It was not being stored for a later thief, it was being given. That act is almost the opposite of hoarding. To the conqueror, the submerged object said, "Take me." To the ritual world that made it, it may have said, "This has been offered." This is why El Dorado remains powerful. The legend exposes a misunderstanding so large that it became history. A ceremony of giving was reimagined as evidence of hidden wealth. A sacred landscape was measured by how much it could yield. The Golden One became the city that wasn't there. And yet something did survive. Not the city, not the empire of gold, but objects, names, places, and memories survived enough to let us reconstruct the path of the era. The Muisca Raft still gathers viewers around its tiny figures. Tunjos still show the technical and spiritual imagination of their makers. Lake Guatavita still lies under the sky, no longer only a target for draining, but a reminder that some places are damaged by the stories outsiders tell about them. The true loss, then, was not the failure to find a city. The true loss was the melting of objects, the disruption of communities, the flattening of sacred practice into treasure, and the habit of treating indigenous knowledge as a doorway to someone else's wealth. El Dorado is often described as one of the great legends of the Americas. It is, but it is also a warning about how legends are made. They are not always born from pure invention. Sometimes they begin with real people, real rituals, and real places. Then power arrives, translation shifts, greed edits, distance enlarges, and a small raft on a sacred lake becomes a city on the edge of the world. So we end where we began, at the water. Not with streets of gold, not with a lost empire waiting to be claimed, but with a quiet lake, a memory of offerings, and the difficult task of seeing the Golden One before the city that wasn't there.